In this episode, we are going to discuss the 5 love languages, Truity's updated version, which has 7 love styles, the strengths and limitations of this framework in general, how to apply them to your life, and how to apply them to other relationships, not just romantic relationships. Welcome to Immersion. I'm your host, Pamela. Here we apply psychology and philosophy topics to find meaning in the modern world. Let's dive in. First of all, what are the 5 love languages? They were created by counselor and minister Jerry Chapman because he noticed in his work with couples that people like to give and receive love in different ways. In essence, these people were speaking different languages of love. If one person loves to give compliments, but their partner loves to receive a physical touch, no matter how many compliments partner A gives, partner B is not going to feel as loved as they could. So while it might not be academic research that helped him come up with this, through seeing many couples, he came up with a framework that is really enduring to this day. This was in 1992 that he first put a book out on this. And right now in 2026, it is so common that people list in their dating profiles what their love language is. If you ask someone on a first date what their love language is, they've likely heard of this framework, and I bet you've heard of it too. But in case you haven't, or if you want a refresher, let's quickly run through what those 5 love languages are. These are in no particular order, but first we have physical touch. This is not just physical intimacy. This also includes hand-holding, cuddling, hugs. Next, we have giving gifts. This could be jewelry on your birthday, but it could even just be someone bringing a cookie home from the bakery on the way home from work. Next, we have quality time. And for some people, this just means time together, maybe doing an activity. For other people, it means really intentionally connecting through conversation. Number 4, we have acts of service. This could be making dinner, cleaning the house, or picking your parents up from the airport. And finally, words of affirmation. So this could be compliments, I love yous, just giving that love verbally. Generally, people have some of all or most of these. It's not as though you only have one love language. When you take the quiz, they are ranked and they let you know how much you have of each one. If you're interested in taking the love language assessment, I will link it down below in the description. But you might choose to wait because there's another version that you might choose to take that we'll mention later. One modern complaint about this whole framework in modern culture is that a lot of it was created at a time where relationships looked quite a bit different. Even over the last 34 years, there's been a lot of change in culture. So for instance, Molly Owens, who created this 7 love style assessment that we're going to discuss later, she created Truity, which does personality assessment work. I heard her speak on the podcast, Psychology of Relationships. And she was mentioning how in their research, she realized that a lot of the original love languages were based on very transactional relationships. And I don't remember if she said this, but I believe what she's getting at is maybe the men earn the living, they would give gifts, the women want more help around the house through things like acts of service, and then the male might be viewed as giving love when he might be doing the bare minimum in terms of chores. And relationships at the time were much more transactional. Now, a lot of people want a love connection or even almost a spiritual soul level connection. And even this comes with its own trade-offs, as relationship expert Esther Perel often talks about. Now we expect so much from our partners. They are supposed to be our confidant, our best friend, our lover, our co-parent, and many other things. And this can make things difficult when we want to get so much back from our partner: emotional connection, intellectual connection, physical connection, friendship, and playfulness. Expectations start to get really high, and we can feel like needs are not being met or we're not measuring up. And this is where I think love languages can come back into the picture in a really helpful way. Because if you know that 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 things mean a ton to your partner, you can choose to prioritize giving them those things. That's really the whole point of this, but we're going to get into some nuances of how to know how to give your partner that kind of love, how to know how to ask for the kind of love you need. Because I think a lot of people might say, oh, my love language is physical touch. And then they kind of just leave it at that, expecting their partner to know exactly what that means, when that could mean something really different from person to person. For one person, that might mean you're having a difficult discussion and you reach a hand out and you hold hands during that, and suddenly they feel way more connected to you. For another person, maybe it just means a little bit every day, like cuddling before bed, because they don't get physical touch in any other area of their life. For a lot of men, this is the case. For women, I have good friends where we'll walk arm in arm together in the streets. We'll give a long hug. We'll maybe lean on the other one while we're laughing. Or even just when I go get my hair done, I have this big mane of hair. That takes hours and hours for her to do. I am getting touched by people other than a partner in my day-to-day life. But for a lot of people, particularly men, they're really lacking in that physical touch, particularly in this modern era. Let's look at how this might look in a relationship. Robin really loves to express her feelings and connect intellectually. For her, conversation is what makes her feel connected. But the problem is her partner, Michael, has a really demanding job, and he feels completely depleted when he gets home from work. She might have that energy to connect after work, but he just wants to turn on the TV, put up his feet for a little bit, and unwind with some sports. She feels as though she doesn't really matter to him and kind of starts pulling away a bit. Michael's love language is physical touch, and he wishes that sometimes they would greet each other in a more loving way after work, or that she would sometimes listen to her audiobook that she's listening to cuddled up next to him while he's watching those sports highlights after work. And because each of them feels their needs are being neglected, they pour into the other one less and less. Resentment grows. Often we can change this negative cycle to a positive cycle if we're able to communicate our needs effectively, and not just what we need, but why we need it, and find solutions for how we could come together better. For example, if they sat down and calmly discussed this, which can get hard, especially if someone's needs have not been met for a very long time. Usually by this point, it's really hard for our emotions to not come up during these conversations, and maybe a little bit does. But maybe they find that Michael just needs 30 minutes to decompress. Really, that's all he needs. But he gets in the door, and it's almost like he needs that transition time from being on at work before he can be on in a different capacity. And maybe Robin then decides that she does a workout video during that time. She does her own thing. She's not expecting a need to be met there that's usually only met in a halfway capacity. When Michael does try to connect with her during that time, when he doesn't really feel it, she can feel that he's not feeling it. And so they could just not try to do that. And instead, maybe they have dinner around 7, a little bit later, and that's when they turn off all devices. They have a little bit of time where they're just connecting one-on-one, emotionally, intellectually. And it doesn't even have to be super deep, just talking about their day, the highs, the lows, something they learned on a podcast that they found interesting. And maybe for her, she doesn't need a ton of that. She just needs a little bit of it every day. And then she's more likely to want to work in that physical touch. And this upward spiral from the downward spiral can work both ways. But I do think communicating about it is really helpful, because as Robin maybe is more physically affectionate with Michael, maybe they loop in a bit more cuddling, hugging, holding each other, he is probably more likely to want to engage in those topics that she wants to discuss. But again, lastly, it's hard to do that when you feel your needs aren't being met. So having the conversation and both choosing to do it at the same time can be really effective. I think there's a couple more lessons that we can learn from this. One of them is, like we talked about earlier, being really clear, not just about your love language, but what that looks like. This is another thing Molly Owens had discussed on the podcast, is going into the specifics under your love language. Because for someone, acts of service could be doing some cleaning. For another person, maybe they kind of consider that the minimum because those are just the chores they split up. And so finally on that, it's really important for you to think of what are a few examples under your love language so you can be really clear how this looks when you talk to your partner about it. Another piece of advice could be to seek out, when you're dating, if you're not currently in a relationship, people that naturally like to give the kind of love you like to receive, and vice versa. If Michael really didn't enjoy those kinds of conversations that Robin enjoyed at all, they might not be a good fit because she's constantly going to be looking for something in the relationship that he doesn't really want to do. He might be sort of forcing it. And I think that there's a really beautiful way that we can seek to love our partner in the way they want to be loved. But in a world where you're single, you're not partnered with someone, it could be helpful to just have this in the back of your mind. How do you like to give and receive love? How does the other person like to give and receive love? And I do find it really interesting that you could have a different love language that you like to give compared to what you like to receive. When I first was taught this maybe 10 years ago, I believe the person I was listening to that was teaching it said, your love language is how you like to give and receive love. But what I've found more in doing research for this episode is you might like to give acts of service and gifts, maybe just very tangible things. Maybe that's just what comes naturally to you. And maybe you really love to receive quality time and words of affirmation, these things that feel above and beyond just the necessities of life that you naturally do easily anyway. So it is interesting to think about. And I have noticed that it might show up a little differently in different relationships. Maybe there's one person that there's just a lot of humor, a lot of banter. Maybe the quality time is just so spot on, you don't even think about it. That need is just so met. But there might be something like giving and receiving gifts that you all just aren't into. You don't do it much. Some holidays you even skip it. But then slowly over time, you realize you do want a little bit of it, even if it's something just small and thoughtful. Because what it really is about is feeling like they were thinking of you when you weren't even around. I think that that's another thing that can be helpful is to dig to the why. I think for a lot of people, something like acts of service or gifts, it's not even necessarily about the tangible acts. I could be projecting here just based on my opinion. But I think often it's about the thoughtfulness. It's not that he gave you flowers. It's that he was thinking about you. And so for someone that really values that thoughtfulness, that might be about some creativity infused in the relationship, a little note written and slipped in their lunch that will perk them up midday. And so for someone very routine, dating a partner that really likes slightly more spontaneous thoughtfulness, that could require flexing a new muscle, building a new skill. I do think that one other limitation of the love languages is that there are so many other ways I think we could give and receive love, like that spontaneous thoughtfulness example, the idea of someone doing things that are not typical. That could be planning a date that you guys have never done before because you're a bit sick of the current routine that you guys have gotten stuck in. That could sort of be a love language, some spontaneity. And that's not one of the ones listed. So again, that's why it helps to dig to the why. What do you like about different ones? And this helps your partner know how to love you more effectively and vice versa. I do want to get to friendships or other areas in a moment like we talked about. But first, you're probably wondering what the 7 are. Because when I first heard Molly Owen speaking about this, I was so excited because I've always thought, kind of like I talked about earlier, those 5 are a bit limited and they don't fully describe all the different ways we could like to give and receive love. And so the first thing that they did when they did research on this, and by they, it is Truity. I didn't even know much about Truity until diving into this episode. I've encountered their website before, but it's essentially a platform that does personality tests. You might have seen them in regards to Myers-Briggs or other personality assessments. And they have millions of people that take assessments on their website. I believe she said every month. So they have tons of data to pull from when they want to create these assessments. I have not done the 7 love styles one yet. I'm going to do it after this and I will link it down below. but I'll briefly run through with you the main differences. First of all, love styles basically describes an area rather than a verb. So for example, with giving gifts, they made that instead financial. So again, financial is an area. It's much more broad. So we could think there about someone that views themselves as a provider. They want to provide financial stability for themselves, their partner, maybe some kids as well. And I really think of my dad here for this because that was a big way he gave love. And it wasn't just with earning an income. It was things like doing the taxes and then filing them in a very organized way, just keeping up with that whole area for our family. The next one that got a big rebrand was words of affirmation became appreciation, which also under that umbrella now has things such as your partner being really excited about your promotion at work or caring about your dreams. And it's not only a compliment such as, oh, you have beautiful eyes. It's appreciating you, valuing you, showing you that more broadly. And I think that's really special because I think particularly for people that are very driven and goal motivated, someone truly seeing their dreams and being invested in it too and celebrating those wins with them, that can be really powerful. And by the way, I am going to link that Psychology of Relationships podcast where Molly was interviewed down below. I realized I've referenced it about 3 times here. So I'd highly recommend listening to it after this if you want to go deeper. Another thing they did research on was physical touch. They were curious if that intimacy that a lot of people think of for this area should be separate from things such as cuddling, hugging, hand-holding. And turns out, nope. Generally, people that wanted one were into both. They kept it in one area. And the final couple things they did was they broke quality time into 3 areas. And thank goodness, I always thought that this was confusing because if one person really loves doing things such as activities together, traveling, going out to eat, working out together, that is so different than what we were talking about earlier with Robin, where she wanted to have more of that mental and emotional connection. And they even broke that into 2 areas. So sort of a meeting of the minds, intellectual stimulation and conversation, that would be one other area under quality time. And then a final area is emotional support and connection, specifically being supported through hard times. I'm sure that's what they found through their research of what people really gravitated to, but all of these are going to be personal and a little bit different for you. Like for me, emotional connection would not just include hard times, it would include all emotions and connecting over what they're feeling, what I'm feeling, what we're feeling. And yeah, I would really be curious to hear what you all think of all of these in the comments, the 5 love languages, the 7 love styles. What are yours? What do you think about these frameworks in general? Are there any additional love languages or styles that you think aren't under these buckets that you would personally add to the framework if you were in charge of it? Anyway, we'll keep going. The last one is practical. So this was acts of service, but now it is just practical concerns more broadly. So for example, instead of just something like vacuuming, it might include something such as filing those taxes, like I mentioned earlier, which is an example of a task that could be under a couple different areas. I think many actions don't only fall under one love language. So let's now talk about how this might apply to friendship or other relationships. First of all, the love language, I don't know if it's a company, entity, it's a website for sure. I at least know that, and they have books. They will mention that this can apply to parents, to kids, to friends. Even they have a quiz, I think, about how to feel appreciated at work. And they really branched into other areas too. For instance, how do you express your anger? What is your apology language? And I think that this is really neat. There are so many different ways someone might express a certain need, and it looks so different from person to person. And I think that's what this is really about, is respecting and understanding individual differences. But the way that I like to apply this with friends is to occasionally ask people if it's not clearly evident. Often with a best friend, you've known them for a while, you can usually tell how they like to give or receive love, what kinds of interactions they value most. But I think that it could be a great conversation to really bring it out in the open and not assume. In fact, after I shoot and publish this episode, I'll probably mention this to a few friends and have some conversations. And speaking of friendship and people having different love languages they like to give versus receive, one of my best friends, I think he really likes to give acts of service and gifts. Again, those very practical, tangible things. But I think he really likes to receive quality time, particularly with humor and playfulness. That's another example of kind of a caveat within some. That's not listed as a love language, but I know that's his friendship love language is humor and playfulness with the people he loves. And then also support and validation, which I would put under both emotional support and kind of that words of affirmation or appreciation one, because if someone feels really uncertain in general, they feel like, did I say the right thing there? Am I doing the right thing prepping for this interview? Just having someone there with them to listen, to validate, to maybe give feedback if really you do feel like they could approach something in a different way, that can be really valuable to people. And with your friends, I think it can be easy to assume that it's all quality time, because often that's what you're doing with friends. You're doing activities, you're meeting up for coffee and chatting. So it would be all three of those things under quality time: activities, intellectual connection, and emotional connection. But if your friend really feels loved and supported with something like acts of service, how meaningful would that be if you reach out that you're going to bring some soup by when they're sick? Or if one of their love languages that they appreciate from friends is tangible gifts, and you do get them a gift on their birthday, or you pick up something for them when you're traveling to bring home. All of that could be really meaningful if it's meaningful to them, but we don't know if we don't ask. And a lot of people are not going to ask for something like that from their friend. But if you bring up the conversation and ask them how they like to be loved and appreciated, then it can help you show up in the best way for those loved ones too. And speaking of which, before we get to some last bullets and some nuance, yeah, it's not even just friends. This makes me want to ask some of my family members this too. And so maybe you could even send this podcast episode to someone in your life that you want to open this dialogue with. So let's talk about a few more tips, and then I'm going to give a very subjective rating. How helpful do I think this framework is on a scale from 1 to 10? So one other thought, I also think this can change through certain phases of life. Maybe you have 3 kids under the age of 8, and seeing your partner cleaning the kitchen with some food that's cooking on the stove could be the hottest thing that you've ever seen. Or maybe because everything is so practical, you just are so in need of a little bit more intimate connection, and them giving you a foot rub while you eat some chocolates, that could just be what you needed most. So checking in during different phases with your partner, saying, what are you needing right now? Versus just thinking that we know them based on one snapshot in time that could have been years ago. Maybe you discussed this on your 3rd date, and then we just assume it stays stagnant over time, but it probably doesn't. Although I do believe that I heard that our probably most core couple, or especially if you're someone that scored really high in one and much lower than the others, that's probably always going to be something that you need. But it is something interesting to check in with from time to time. Lastly, I think that it could be helpful to make that list of the specifics, like we talked about. Take the quiz, one or both, find your love languages, and then list underneath it specifically what verbs or actions you most appreciate. So for instance, maybe someone really appreciates this intellectual connection. And then how does that look? It looks like at least twice a week, 30 to 60 minutes of a really engaged conversation. And if you're as weird as me about this, this is my number 1 love language. I know it's not that surprising, shocker, I have this podcast. But something that means a lot to me is if my partner and or I literally even keep notes during the week. It could just be 1 sentence of something we found interesting to discuss when we come back together. Because I feel like half the time there's a lot of conversations that aren't very good over text. I'll give you an example. I was listening to a video on power law distributions and black swan events. This is basically when certain events can be a lot more impactful than others. And this is not something that you can text that well about. This is something that you want to have a 10, 15-minute discussions about the practical applications, from weather events to YouTube to investing. And if I write down just black swan events and power law distributions, then I will remember the video when we sit down to chat and we can have a good discussion. And so long story short, that is a practical application for the love language, a way to get it met. And then if I'm seeing someone who also either likes this or knows that I like this, they might shoot me a podcast and say, hey, I want to discuss this over date night. And then it's sort of a way of staying intellectually connected. And it's a way of making sure that when we sit down to connect, we'll actually get that mind-to-mind intellectual connection versus just these more tangible day-to-day things. Okay, so what would my rating for love languages be? How helpful of a framework is this 1 to 10? If you had asked me before starting this episode, I think I would have actually given it a 9 out of 10 with one caveat, because it has stood the test of time. I mean, depending on how you define time, 34 years is a while. That's a long time for something to be out in the zeitgeist and as known as it is. And a lot of people find it helpful. And it gives us a framework for verbalizing something that was often unspoken. The caveat would have been that it's limited. And seeing how limited it is, and maybe how much the importance of it is overstated, is actually why I would give it a lower score that I've found in my research for this episode. I would actually give it more like a 6.5 out of 10. Because first of all, I did not think it was research backed. It was just this guy, Gary's views. And that can be helpful, but it's limited compared to something that is more rigorously tested. But then some research, such as just one study I'll link below, but I think more as well, has pointed to this, that it's actually not, it doesn't hold up when it's tested by research. So not only was it not researched, but when it was, it is not holding up. For instance, in this abstract that I'm going to link by Sharon M. Flicker and Flavia Sancier Barbosa, they recruited a sample of 696, 70% married, 97.3 cohabitating. This is through Amazon Cloud Research, it says. I do not know what that means, but I'm just going to keep reading what they found. Primary love language behavior no better predicted relationship satisfaction or perceived love than lower ranked love languages. Words of affirmation and quality time better predicted perceived love and relationship satisfaction than participants' primary love languages. And then talks about how generally that matches what should be the recommendation for what relationship therapists should work on with clients. So how can they speak more effectively to each other, words of affirmation, and how can they pour into each other with quality time? That totally makes sense. Fascinating. And of course, this is just one paper here, but I would like to speak a little bit on a personal experience of someone that I talked to. I actually talked to a couple of girlfriends about this. And one, when I brought up the love languages, I saw she got a little uncomfortable and I inquired about it. I said, I can tell that these are kicking up something for you. What is it? And she said, I've had multiple men give me this book or recommend this to me. And the problem is, and I'm not saying that men do this to women. I think women can do this to men. This was just her experience, is that sometimes people bring this up as if it will solve everything when there are many other problems potentially in a marriage or relationship. Let's imagine that someone had an addiction, but then they are saying, oh, well, let's work on our love through love languages. Or imagine someone has done no work on their attachment style. They have an avoidant attachment style. They pull away quite a bit. And then they think that they can just give you your love language, such as giving you tons of compliments, and make it all better. It doesn't fix the underlying issues in the relationship. And then one of the girlfriends that I was talking with said, it's almost like there's no one solution for relationships. We so want connection, and we can see that as the heart of this, is that we really want connection. We want to experience love and give love, and for it not to be so painful. So of course we're looking for an answer, but if we can just hold this in mind as one of many, many, many frameworks and tools and things to keep in mind in connection with others, then I think it can be really helpful. So it's just with that understanding and caveat. Oh, and last thing before we close out, this came up in a different conversation I was having. I love to discuss with the people in my lives topics that are coming up for the podcast because they will often bring up great insights I wouldn't have thought of. And someone said, I wonder if everyone can receive their love languages. Some people have a hard time receiving love in general, receiving kindness in general. They only feel comfortable giving. Maybe they don't feel worthy of love or respect. And since we've been doing that series on self-worth and our relationship with ourselves, of course, you can tell by the topic of this episode that we're taking a little break from that before we get back to it. One kind of food for thought idea here is if you are working on your self-worth, your self-esteem, ask yourself, am I comfortable receiving love? Do I feel worthy of it? And I don't think you can just flip on the tap or light switch suddenly, but you can slowly turn on the dimmer or ease on the faucet on that and gradually let it into your life. Whether it's acts of kindness from yourself to yourself or slowly, hopefully also from others as well, because it can feel almost vulnerable. You can feel like, oh, I don't want to ever become dependent on that, or oh, wow, I could start going down another rabbit hole. We'll stop here. Next week, we are going to do an episode on what many consider the most dangerous emotion in connection with other people. So it is continuing on this thread of connection. I would love to hear from you. Thoughts in the comments on YouTube as always. If you are new here, or even if you just want to know a little bit more about the show, we have this on many podcast players, Apple, Spotify, and many others. I'll have that linked in the description in case you did not know. The show is also on YouTube as a video podcast. Wherever you're listening, or even if you're listening on YouTube and you just want to help out the show, go to Apple or Spotify and boop that star rating. We would really, really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. That's what I appreciate most, though, is just being in conversation with you and hearing your thoughts. We do also have a SpeakPipe voicemail feature. If you want to leave the show a voicemail, we might play it down the line in another episode. We really want to make this show long-term, something that feels like a conversation, whether that's the comments in YouTube, whether it's the SpeakPipe voicemails. I would love to just get to know more people that are curious about similar topics and speak to you next Sunday. That's when we release episodes. Hope you have a great week.